In a stunning admission, the Justice Department now says two DOGE workers assessed, accessed, and then shared sensitive Social Security data. And one of them even signed an agreement with a political advocacy group that was working to overturn election results in certain states. Now, the DOJ doesn't know what data was shared on that server or whether the data still exists there. Harry Littman and Richard Stengel are back with us. Harry, it's not just that they shared that sensitive data. It was also on a non-secure third-party server and is about overturning elections, or at least associated with a group.
Tonight, we're looking at a story that sounds like something out of a techno thriller, but every word of it comes from federal court documents and Department of Justice filings. It is a story about your most private information, a vulnerable cloud server, and a secret agreement aimed at overturning election results. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, is at the center of a massive data breach involving 300 million Americans. This is the breakdown of what happened and why officials are now calling for criminal prosecutions. Let's play this clip.
What are the implications here?
You're really right, Chris. This is the worst nightmare that people were thinking about back then, and it absolutely has current implications for the election. So first, the DOJ misstated to the court. Terrible transgression, basically, we were led to believe, because DOGE misled them. Second, Social Security Administration information, the most private and sensitive of all data for Americans. And third, maybe most importantly, given and even an agreement signed to one of these voter advocacy groups that are pushing the argument that there's a voter fraud out there. So really subject to the most pernicious use in favor of the canard that Trump keeps pressing, that there's a lot of voter fraud out there. That plus the lie, misstatement that DOJ had to correct. It's the ultimate tail between your legs submission, but it's the ultimate thing we were worrying about then. DOGE, whoever the heck they were, and they seem to be sort of out of the picture now, but no, they gave the most sensitive data to a voter advocacy group associated with the right-wing arguments against Democratic victories in elections.
The United States Department of Justice has made an admission in federal court that represents a total reversal of its previous stance on national data security. For months, the public was told that there was no evidence of any compromise regarding our most sensitive information. However, in a filing submitted on a Friday in an ongoing lawsuit, the government acknowledged that employees working for the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, improperly accessed and shared Social Security data. This is not just a minor policy slip. This involves the private information of more than 300 million Americans. According to the sources, this data includes Social Security numbers, names, and addresses. The Justice Department revealed that at least 2 DOGE employees were involved in these actions. These workers assessed, accessed, and then shared sensitive data on unapproved third-party servers. One of the most serious revelations in the court filing is that a DOGE member signed a secret data sharing agreement. This agreement was with a political advocacy group that was working to find evidence of voter fraud and overturn election results. The Social Security Administration, or SSA, told the court it had no idea this agreement existed until months after it was signed. They only discovered it during an unrelated review in November. This discovery has led the agency to refer 2 potential violations of the Hatch Act to the Office of Special Counsel for a full investigation.
Yeah, and here we are again talking about these arguments about voter fraud that doesn't exist. And by the way, President Trump brought it up again today at Davos. Here it is.
It's a war that should have never started, and it wouldn't have started if the 2020 U.S. presidential election weren't rigged. It was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news.
The Hatch Act is a federal law that strictly prohibits government employees from engaging in political activity while on the job. Legal experts and lawmakers are describing this as a worst nightmare scenario for data privacy. The sources indicate that the data was copied to a vulnerable internal cloud server. This server lacked the independent oversight and tracking necessary to see who was looking at the data or where it was going. Internal risk assessments by the SSA found a 35 to 65% chance of a catastrophic adverse effect because of this breach. In a worst-case scenario, the government might have to reissue every single Social Security number in the country. This development is being framed as an about face for Social Security officials. As recently as August, the agency insisted there was no evidence that personal data had been compromised. They even denied warnings from their own chief data officer, Charles Borges. Borges had warned Congress that DOGE was storing the data of Americans in an unsafe environment. Now the court filing admits that there were communications and uses of data that were non-compliant with court orders. To understand how we got here, we have to look at how the Department of Government Efficiency operated inside these agencies. DOGE was established by President Donald Trump at the start of 2025. Its stated goal was to cut government spending and root out waste. However, the sources describe an environment of extreme secrecy. DOGE workspaces were reportedly cordoned off within federal buildings by armed guards. Regular agency employees were not given clear reasons why these unusual security measures were being used. Even higher-ranking officials at the Social Security Administration were unable to get specific details on what the DOGE team was doing. The sources state that officials did not know who the DOGE staff were accountable to. There was no clear chain of command. While a White House official was technically the administrator, whistleblowers described her as a figurehead with no real power over the staff. The de facto head was billionaire Elon Musk, who staffed the operation with loyalists. Many of these staff members were recent college graduates with no prior government or policy experience.
He says people are going to be prosecuted for fraud that didn't happen. But what about these two DOGE guys? What might happen to them?
Okay, first, that the president says that would normally be a joke, except who has decided in Trump 2.0 who's prosecuted? Donald Trump, so that you have to be really concerned. The DOJ did the minimum here. It referred these two employees for so-called Hatch Act violations, meaning they did political work while on the job working for all of us. But Chris, that's the sort of mildest administrative remedy. What really has to happen, we have a broader whistleblower complaint now that's in the court, is some kind of focus, both in the courts and Congress. A member of Congress today called this the worst data breach in the history of the United States, for really scrutiny of just what's going on and where those data are. Short of that, will there be criminal consequences? Potentially under the Hatch Act, but that's really the least of it for what has happened here.
So, Rick, last summer, Social Security's chief data officer actually resigned after filing a whistleblower complaint. Do you think we're ever going to learn more to the extent of what happened here and who's really behind it?
I think we will. And Chris, I went and read about that complaint today. I want to make one broader point before I get to the specific complaint. And this is in defense of the deep state.
One such employee, a 19-year-old, had previously provided support for a cybercrime group known for hacking law enforcement email accounts. These are the individuals who were given access to the Numerical Identification System database, which contains the personal details of nearly every U.S. citizen and resident. This database includes birth dates, race, ethnicity, phone numbers, and family member names. The whistleblower complaint filed by Charles Borges is a central part of this narrative. Borges is a Navy veteran and a career civil servant who joined the SSA in late January. He allegedly spent weeks pressing for fixes inside the agency after seeing how data was being handled. When nothing changed, he filed a formal complaint with the U.S. Office of Special Counsel and members of Congress. He alleged that DOGE staffers created a live copy of the entire country's Social Security data. Borges argued that placing this data in a cloud environment without oversight puts everyone at risk for identity theft and medical fraud. He described the actions of DOGE as a gross mismanagement and a threat to public health and safety. Despite these warnings, the SSA's own chief information officer, who was a DOGE associate, reportedly dismissed the security concerns. They allegedly prioritized business needs over the safety of the public's information. The political implications of this breach are becoming a major focus in Washington. The court filing specifically mentions that data was shared with each other using Cloudflare, which is an unauthorized third-party server. The agency admits it cannot determine what information was sent or if it still exists on that server. In one documented instance, a DOGE staffer sent an encrypted file to a senior advisor to the operation. The agency believes this file contained the names and addresses of about 1,000 people taken from Social Security systems. Officials have not been able to access the file to confirm exactly what is inside. This leads us back to the Hatch Act violations. The Hatch Act exists to keep the federal workforce free from partisan political influence. It says that government employees cannot use their official authority to interfere with an election. They are also prohibited from using their official titles while engaging in political activity. The fact that DOGE workers were using their positions to work with a group trying to overturn election results is a direct challenge to these laws. The sources show that these employees were conducting searches of personal information even after the agency believed it had revoked their access. On March 24th, searches were still being performed as late as 9:30 in the morning, despite a court's temporary restraining order. This order was meant to stop DOGE from engaging in what a judge called a fishing expedition for fraud based on little more than suspicion. Now, Democratic lawmakers are demanding a full criminal investigation. Representatives John Larson and Richard Neal have released a joint statement calling for the prosecution of the DOGE appointees involved. They argue that these individuals were never approved by Congress and were never even publicly identified. They are calling the incident abhorrent violations of the public trust and possibly the largest data breach in the history of the country. Larson and Neal have introduced a bill called the Protecting Americans Social Security Data Act. This bill would block political appointees from accessing sensitive Social Security data systems. It would also establish strict privacy requirements in federal law and strengthen penalties for those who violate these rules. They are accusing Republican leadership of blocking accountability and shielding DOGE from oversight for months. The legal battle is also being fought through a lawsuit from the AFL-CIO. This lawsuit was originally filed to cut off DOGE's access to government records. The Justice Department's recent court filing validates the union's arguments. It provides concrete evidence that DOGE's actions were potentially outside of agency policy and non-compliant with court orders. This could lead to the administration being held in contempt of court, which would trigger fines and other sanctions. The broader consequences of this breach go beyond the immediate legal fights. The sources suggest that this will lead to a major regulatory overhaul of how federal agencies handle data. Agencies will likely have to face stricter vetting for any third-party tools they use. There will be more rigorous audits and increased scrutiny from Congress. This is expected to create long-term operational friction and significant costs for the government. Public reaction to these developments has been marked by a mix of concern and a demand for action. On social media platforms like Reddit, many users are expressing frustration that this was allowed to happen in broad daylight. Some are encouraging others to take immediate steps to protect themselves, such as freezing their credit reports with the major agencies. Others are suggesting that people file their taxes early to prevent someone else from fraudulently claiming their returns using stolen data. There is also a significant amount of discussion regarding the motives behind DOGE. The sources highlight that many DOGE workers maintained strong ties to private companies, including those owned by Elon Musk, such as Tesla, SpaceX, and xAI. This has raised questions about whether the public's data was being used to benefit these private interests. One report alleged that DOGE was using government data to help build artificial intelligence models. The sources also reveal a secretive cybersecurity nightmare where DOGE operatives were allegedly monitoring the activity of regular federal employees. Some workers reported that DOGE was using AI tools to scan for disloyalty and secretly recording meetings. One employee at the Department of Housing and Urban Development described the experience as being in a horror film. This climate of fear was paired with massive job cuts, with over 280,000 workers laid off across various agencies. Interestingly, the sources note that DOGE did not actually find the massive fraud it promised to root out. While Musk initially claimed the operation would save $2 trillion, that goal was later revised down to $150 billion. Despite the promises to improve efficiency, the layoffs left the Social Security Administration struggling to keep up with 6 million pending cases. Eventually, the administration began rehiring hundreds of the employees that DOGE had fired. The Department of Government Efficiency was ultimately shuttered in November 2025, months earlier than originally planned. However, the fallout continues. Even though many personnel have left the government, it remains unclear what they did with the sensitive data they accessed. There are concerns that some may have copied it to personal devices for their own use. The information they handled remains highly valuable to foreign adversaries and bad actors. To understand the legal gravity of this situation, it is helpful to look at the Privacy Act of 1974. This law was created specifically to safeguard the records the government collects on individuals. It requires the government to inform people why their information is being collected and how it will be used. It also mandates that personal information only be used for the reasons originally given. The Act establishes that agencies are stewards of this information, not owners. The Privacy Act was passed in the late 1960s and early 70s as people became worried about computer data banks. It includes criminal penalties for federal employees who willfully violate the law. For example, a fine can be imposed for disclosing personal information that should not be released. It also prohibits the maintaining of secret files on individuals. The actions described in the DOGE court filings appear to go directly against these long-standing protections. The sources make it clear that the Social Security Administration is now in a position of stewardship that it has struggled to maintain. The agency has the responsibility to protect information from those who have no legitimate use for it. By allowing DOGE staffers to copy 300 million records to an insecure cloud, the agency's leadership is facing accusations of failing in that duty. As we move forward, there are several key things to watch. First is the outcome of the Hatch Act investigation by the Office of Special Counsel. If it is confirmed that officials coordinated with political groups to overturn election results, it could lead to firings or further criminal charges. Second is the progress of the Larson and Neal bill in Congress. Its passage would represent a significant legislative check on how political appointees can access your data. The third thing to watch is the AFL-CIO lawsuit. Any further court orders that limit or revoke DOGE's previous access would be a major legal victory for those seeking to protect privacy. It would also be a significant setback for the administration's efforts to use government data for their own initiatives. Finally, the long-term risk of a national identity crisis remains. If the 300 million records shared on unsecure servers are used for widespread fraud, the financial and social cost would be staggering. The government would be facing massive class action lawsuits and the fiscal liability of reissuing Social Security numbers for the entire population. This story is a reminder of the delicate balance between government efficiency and the fundamental right to privacy. It shows how quickly safeguards can be bypassed when oversight is removed. The admission by the Justice Department is just the beginning of a much larger conversation about accountability, the law, and the security of the American people. The details in these court documents paint a picture of an operation that functioned outside the normal rules of the federal government. From the armed guards to the secret agreements, the Department of Government Efficiency operated in a way that left even other government agencies in the dark. And while DOGE itself may be gone, the data they accessed and the questions they raised are still very much with us. For the millions of Americans whose Social Security numbers were part of this breach, the consequences are personal. It is a breach that affects retirees, workers, and their families. It is a story that started with a promise to save money and ended with an admission in a federal court that our most private data was put at risk. We will continue to follow the investigations into the Hatch Act violations and the ongoing lawsuits. The calls for prosecution from members of Congress are growing louder as more details emerge from these filings. It is a developing story that hits at the very core of how our government is supposed to protect its citizens. As we wrap up tonight, the bottom line is clear. The Department of Justice has confirmed that what was once called no evidence of a breach is now a documented history of improper access and shared data. The security of 300 million people was placed in the hands of a team that, according to the sources, disregarded federal policy and court orders. The worst nightmare of data privacy experts has become a legal reality. Whether there will be real accountability for these actions is the question that now sits before the courts and the United States Congress. We will keep you updated as this narrative unfolds and as more documents are made public. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, please consider sharing it with others who may be concerned about their data security. We will see you next time.